everybody, and welcome to another board game review and gameplay demo. Today we've got a fantasy-themed skirmish game that takes only about a half hour or an hour to play that involves you deploying units in the form of cards, moving them around the board in an effort to defeat your opponent's king. In addition, we've got some really unique mechanics, particularly in the form of being able to throw dice for the purpose of determining if you're actually able to hit something. It's a really cool dexterous aspect to it, and you've got a lot of different options in terms of strategy, how you're going to play, what you're going to do, if you're going to be using war machines, all that kind of stuff. But you'll be able to see some of that in the demo. Suffice to say, the game itself is Battle Barrage. Like I said, this is a fantasy-themed dexterity/skirmish-based game that takes a lot of different aspects from a bunch of different game styles and sort of melds them all together. In the end, it's for 2 players, takes at most about an hour to play, a little bit less time to learn. It's fairly simple, shouldn't be too much of a problem. Now, before we get started, I will remind you, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at my Facebook and my Twitter pages. Over there, I post whenever I have new videos, when I start doing live streams, fun articles, all sorts of different stuff. So I do hope that you'll take a look, but with that, we're going to go ahead and get started and talk about what Barrage Battle is similar to. As far as similarities are concerned, there are 3 major games that I wanted to talk about. The first one is another fantasy-themed skirmish game called Mage Wars. In Mage Wars, you are playing as a character that has a specific spell book with all the different things that they're able to do. And what you do, you take the units or the spells, whatever they happen to be, and you pay the price, put them on the board, and then you move them around as you see fit in order to fight off your opponent. In that sense, it's very similar to Barrage Battle in the sense of how the game progresses and exactly what you're doing. Although with Mage Wars, again, you have specific characters that have specific abilities, whereas in this you have a unit deck that everybody is drawing from. And you've got a little bit more in terms of leniency as far as what combat you can do and also how you can make your turn what you can do with it. The second major comparison I wanted to make is one called Dungeon Fighter. Dungeon Fighter is a game I talked about a while ago when I discussed dexterity board games, and in that one you essentially have a big target in the middle and you're tossing dice onto it to try to land and do damage to a bad guy that you're fighting. In this game you have an almost identical mechanic where you are throwing dice and trying to get them to land on your opponent's cards or maybe your cards and do some friendly fire, and then they take damage. And that's for the ranged attacks. That's how ranged attacks in this game work. It's not an automatic hit. You have to toss the dice. With melee attacks, you roll, and if you roll above 2, then you get a hit, essentially. But the ranged attacks, you have to physically throw the dice. The third one is another dexterity similarity, and that is the Cash and Guns Yakuza expansion. This is another game that I've talked about a few times in this context, and in that case, you've got a shuriken that you throw to try to knock over other characters' little standees, and you also have a shotgun add-on that potentially allows you to hit 2 characters simultaneously. In order to do that, you have to toss up pieces, and depending on how they land determines whether or not people get wounds. Again, it's a similar feeling to this in the sense of you're throwing the dice and trying to get it land on a specific spot. Although obviously strategically this is much deeper compared to the Yakuza expansion. And you've got a lot more going on with deploying the units and moving them around, attacking, how you attack, if you're going to be using spells, all sorts of different things like that. And so with all of those little notes, we'll go right on ahead and I'll talk about and do my demo for how to play Barrage Battle. Alright everybody, we're pretty much all set up and ready to start playing some Barrage Battle. In this skirmish game, the end goal is to defeat your opponent's king by doing some resource management, unit deployment, movement, and a little bit of dexterity-based dice throwing. At the beginning of the game, each player is going to receive 3 unit cards, a king, a castle, and a wizard card. The castle card can be deployed in either of the first 2 rows on your side. The king card and the wizard card can go anywhere on the player's side of the board. The entire board is a grid of 15 by 7, and for the purpose of this video, we'll be focusing on this side so that you guys can see it at least a little bit easier. After both players have placed their castle, king, and wizard, they each get 10 cards from the unit deck, and I'll be explaining a little bit about the cards in a little bit. Off to the side, we've got gold coins as well as mana tokens, and these will allow us to deploy our different cards as well as cast spells later on. And then we also have dice, because we're going to be able to throw some dice, whether it's in melee or ranged combat. Of all the different card types, there are a few key categories I wanted to mention. The first ones are essentially the main unit cards. These are shown by a little red dude in the top left-hand corner of the card. And we have two major types. We've got ranged units and melee units. Ranged units have a bow, and melee units have a little sword on them. Next up, we have structure cards. These are essentially just standing around to serve two purposes. They protect your units from ranged attacks, and they also allow you to deploy units. Most units are only able to be deployed when adjacent to a structure. That's how they come out onto the board. Next up, we've got war machines. War machines are generally non-modal, and they just sort of lob things across the board. In this case, we've got a siege tower. This is the one that's able to move. It doesn't attack, but it acts as sort of a moving shield for anybody in the immediate spot behind it, so that they don't get injured. Last but not least is the spell cards. Spell cards have a little purple lightning bolt in the corner, and these do essentially exactly what they say. There's a lot of different types that do a lot of different things. And they're mostly self-explanatory, and just to go over sort of the anatomy of each card type, we'll start off with these main unit cards here. Again, they say whether or not they are melee or ranged attacks. It tells you how they're able to move. On your turn, you're always able to move 3 units or make up to 3 movement actions, so to speak. And essentially, you can move in either the cardinal directions, up, down, left, right, or some cards can move in any direction. They can move diagonally as well. It just depends on the card, and it gives their movement range. So in this case, we've got a scout, which can move up to, I believe it's 4 spaces, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, and the crossbowmen can move up to 2. So for example, if you have a scout, they could go 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. Okay? And then the crossbowmen would only be allowed to go 1, 2. They're not allowed to move diagonally. Okay, easy enough, right? Next up is the attacking. There are 3 major ways to attack your opponent in this game. You've got melee attacks, ranged attacks, and spells. Melee attacks work by having a melee character within range. More often than not, you're going to have an attack range of 1, which means you have to be adjacent. The other possibility is that there are some cards that can attack from 2 spaces away. But more often than not, it's going to be just this, and you declare who you're trying to attack. So I would say, I am a scout, I am attacking the crossbowmen, and you roll a die, or 6-sided die, or however many dice it says. Anything that is above a 2 is considered a hit. I got a 1, so that's a miss, okay? And if I were to get a hit, let's say I got a 3, then the scout in this, or the crossbowmen rather, would take 1 damage, and they've only got 1 health. They have 1 little heart, which means that they would be gone and they would be discarded. The other main thing that you have on the cards that I forgot to mention is the cost for deployment, which is the little green circle. That's how much it costs to actually put the thing on the board. And again, that's generally just going to be adjacent to something else. For the case of the units, they have to be adjacent to a structure. Okay, the ranged attacks are kind of the fun little quirk for this particular game, because this is where we actually get to throw some dice across the board with the idea is that we're trying to get it to land somewhere. More often than not, you're going to be rolling d4s for the ranged attacks, but there are different things that use different cards. For example, the ballista is the one that uses the d12s. Okay. But in the end, the idea for the ranged attack is several-fold. First off, you can only attack forward, right? You cannot attack back into your own territory. You are also only allowed to attack something that is at least a row away from you. So even if this is my crossbowman and there's a bad guy over here, I can't attack because they're only one row away. I would be able to attack the scout though, if I could. Actually, we'll scoot back here. This right here, this middle row is called no man's land. Everything in there is immune to melee and ranged attacks, and you cannot engage. You cannot have melee and ranged attacks in there. You're still vulnerable to spells though. Okay, but effectively the way this works is you're going to roll the dice and try to get it to land on the squares where certain cards are. It doesn't matter what the roll actually comes up as, just as long as it actually shows up. On this particular card, I get a critical hit on a 2, 3, or 4 if I successfully hit, and that means that I would do double damage. Okay, so the idea is that you throw it before you reach the plane of wherever your card is. So let's see if I can hit the wizard. So we go, we just toss it. No, not quite. Okay, let's say that I could try again. Here, let's say I was right here instead. And then we try again. Nope. It's hard. Come on, you little devil. There we go. So now that it's actually touching the card, that means that I successfully hit. It only came up as a 1 on the die, which means I did 1 damage. Right? That's how ranged attacks work. Some of them work differently than others, but the main rules are it doesn't matter how much it rolls and moves across the board. All that matters is where it stops. Okay, you can throw it however you want to. It doesn't really matter. The idea, again, is just that you're trying to hit stuff. Let's see if we can go that way instead. Nope. But yeah, this is a pretty tough part of the game, and it takes a lot of getting used to, but it's really fun. It's a really neat little thing. And all of the cards will have some kind of text on them that explains exactly how they work and all that kind of stuff, but it's fairly self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go too in-depth into it. Same with the spells. To go over exactly how the game works, it's very, very simple. This takes place over the course of several rounds, and each round is composed of multiple phases. First is the declaration phase. You say, are we at peace, are we engaged, or are we at war? We meaning your characters. If you're at peace, you essentially get more money, but you can't attack. If you're engaged, you get a balance between the money and the attacks. And if you're at war, you get no money, but you get a bunch of attack actions. And that's effectively the difference. It's the difference of 5 money, 3 money, 0 money, 0 actions, 3 actions, 5 actions. Again, you always get to move 3 times though, no matter what. During the upkeep phase is when you get your gold and your mana. Mana crystals are obtained if you still have your wizard card on the board, which I accidentally took. And we'll put them back there. So the mana goes wherever you want. I put it on the wizard card personally, but that's the upkeep phase. And again, that's used to, it's used to utilize spells, and it's also used to block damage on the wizard. So you would be able to stop anybody from hitting you as well. During deployment, you pay the cost to deploy certain units, and again, they can only come out of structures. Certain units can deploy adjacent to other units, like for example, the squire can deploy next to a knight. All right? But more often than not, it's just going to be in the cardinal directions of a structure. Movement phase, you get 3 movement capabilities, which means that you just follow whatever the movement rules are on a card, and you just move that many spaces. And again, you get 3 of those no matter what. Next up is the action phase. This is where you are able to either attack, which costs 1 action, use a spell which costs 1 action, or you can spend 2 actions to discard any number of cards and then draw back up that number of cards so that you can just sort of get rid of anything bad that you don't really want. And at the end of your turn, you draw back up or you discard down to 10. You always end your turn with only 10 cards. And that's pretty much the entire game. It's really not complicated, and essentially it's just how are you going to move around, how are you going to attack, lobbing the pot shots, all that kind of stuff. And just remember that with melee attacks, you don't have to land on the square, you just need to roll above a 2, and with the ranged attacks, that's where you actually have to land on the card itself in order to do damage, or in the square. Like if you push it away, then that's fine because it's still in the square where the thing was, right? So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and tell you how the first couple of rounds might go so that you guys can get a general idea for it. One thing is that during the first and second rounds, you don't obey the rules completely because it balances the game out, since there would be an asymmetric starting point otherwise. And effectively, the first player will say, this person, you just get 3 gold. You don't actually declare anything. All you do is you just straight up get 3 gold, and then you don't get any actions at all. All you do is you get 3 money, but then you can deploy as you see fit. So for example, let's say I'm going to go ahead and get an archer at a cost of 1 to deploy, and then I'll get, let's see here, we'll go ahead and get a Javeliner. And that is a deployment cost of 1. And then that's it. I could deploy a little bit more, but I'm not going to. I'm going to say I'm finished now. Now, movement phase. Again, you get 3 movements. So the archer is able to move 2 in cardinal directions. So we'll move 1, 2. Javeliner is same thing. It's able to move 2 cardinal. So 1, 2. And then for my third one, I'll go ahead and move my archer again. Right? So that's it. Action phase is skipped because it's the first round of the game. Second round, for the second player, they get to declare. So this person is going to go ahead and declare peace, right? Because no matter what, they skip their actions. Even if they choose engagement, they're not allowed to actually do any actions. So there's really no reason not to pick peace, right? So you get the gold. I forgot to give mana as well. So you get mana, and then drop to 10 at the end of the round. Forgot that. So everybody got the mana crystal, and now we deploy over here. So we will go ahead and we will do, let's see here. We'll go ahead and do a double archer, 1 and 2. And that's a cost of 2. Movement phase, same thing. We'll move 1, 2, 1, 2, and then 1, 2. All right? Just like that. So that's the end of this player's first turn. Now we are at the point where we are able to really do stuff. So we'll go ahead and declare engagement, which means that we get 3 gold and still 1 mana for the wizard over here. And now we get to deploy. Let's see, do we want to deploy anything? What's good? What's good? We'll go ahead and do a swordsman here. Actually, will we have anything better? Yeah, we'll do a swordsman. And that's a cost of 2. And now the movement phase, which means that we are going to go, let's see here, let's do 1, 2, and then we'll move our wizard back 1, and then move the javeliner up a little bit. Now, action phase. Because I declared engagement, that means that I get 3 actions. So that means spells and or attacks, right? I'll move over here so I can do these properly. First, I'm going to utilize a spell. In this case, I will be using Acid Fog. The way that this works is you throw this card and deal a damage to any cards that this lands on. That includes Friendly Fire, okay? So we will spend our 2 mana tokens in order to utilize it. And then we just sort of go like that. Ha! I hit the archer. So that means that the archer will take 1 damage from my Acid Fog. Boop! And it only had 1 health. So that means that the archer is gone and it goes to the discard pile. And then the Acid Fog does as well. So that was my first action. For my second action, I will attack with my archer. So I roll 2d4. And you can roll them either together or separately. I'll go ahead and roll them separately. Nope. Ugh. Oh, so close. I missed, unfortunately. And for my third action, I'll attack with the Javeliner. So with the Javeliner, they use a d6, and I can rethrow a missed attack, and I critically hit at 5 or 6. Yep. Oh, dang. That would have been awesome. Okay, so those are my 3 actions. I'm done, and now it's this player's turn. They're going to do the same thing. They declare engagement, so they get 3 monies. I forgot they spent a couple of cards, so they get 2 cards back. Right? And then we deploy. So we'll go ahead and get a soldier at a cost of 1, and then a javeliner at a cost of 1. Movement 1, 2, and then we'll go 1, 2. Now remember, this middle one is no man's land, so I wouldn't be able to attack if I ended up in there. That's not really a good position to be in. That's not very pleasant. I forgot my little magic thing. Now, actions. Get 3 actions. We'll go ahead and attack with the archer. 1, no, and 2. Oh, so close. So very close. Next, attack with the javeliner. Boom! Take that, archer. So that guy is gone because he only had 1 hit point available. Third action, I'll attack with the javeliner again. Ah, nothing. Okay, but that's pretty much how the game works. It's fairly simple, but you can see it's a lot of fun with like sort of the little dice throwing and stuff like that, and you get the dexterity aspect, which is really, really cool. And I personally enjoy it, at least. But again, you just keep playing until somebody's king is down. You can keep building up your structure so that you can deploy units closer to the bad guys. You've got your siege towers, which allow you to move forward and make you immune to ranged attacks from other people. A couple of little things to note. If you have a ranged attack land on 2 squares, then both squares will take the damage. If you are behind a structure like the king is over here, then both things still take the damage, but if you are behind a structure, the structure will take the damage for you. So in this case, the king would take no damage, but the castle would take 2. In this case, the castle would only take 1 damage because the castle was directly hit. In this case, it's the same thing. It hit the king, but the structure takes the damage, so it would only get the 1. Right? And that's effectively how it works. There's a lot of different spells, a lot of different units, lots of different ways to play. It's a fun little skirmish game. But with that, I hope you enjoyed this little demo for how it works, and we'll go ahead and get into my pros and cons as well as some general conclusions about the game. Well, everybody, as I mentioned, now's the time for pros and cons. My first pro is also a bit of a con for me, and that is the way that the ranged attacks work. Doing the little dice tossing is really cool, and it's a lot of fun, and frankly, it makes sense for a skirmish game like this. You know, you toss them and you just see if you can get a hit. The thing is that it's good, it's interesting, and it's unique, but at the same time, it's a con for me because you might just be really bad at it, like I am. I mean, you guys saw me, I'm sitting there chucking dice and I just can't hit anything to save my life. And so it can be really frustrating in that sense. But at the same time, again, it's really fun. It's a nifty little thing, and it doesn't feel like a gimmick, which is a really big plus for me. It feels like a real mechanic that actually does something for the game. And some of the dice that you use are easier to roll and throw and all that kind of stuff. Like the D4s, they don't roll and tumble and things. They normally just sort of like splat and maybe like bounce and a little bit. But most of the dice, they'll at least do a little bit of movement. And some people are used to it more so than others and things like that. And so it's nice in that sense, and that's why it's a pro for me, but also a little bit of a con. Really big pro for me is just in general as a skirmish game, I really enjoy it. I love the theme. I'm a huge fan of Mage Wars, and like I said, this is really in that same sort of thematic vein. I love the strategy that you have with this, whether you're going to deploy more ranged units and just sort of keep them behind the lines and just go pew 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 pew, or if you're going to try to deploy more melee units and just get them across as fast as possible, or if you're going to try to focus a little bit more on spells and just sort of wearing people down a little bit, even if they're in no man's land, for example. So you have a lot of strategic decision making that you're able to make, which I love. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the declaration aspect. Are you going to spend around doing peace so that you can just sort of gather up gold, or are you just going to keep on like with engagement in war and just try to press the attack as much as possible? You know, these are the big questions that you have to ask yourself as a player when you're playing this game. And it makes it so interesting and so deep for me personally, and I really appreciate that because I'm not a big skirmish gamer, but this is one that I really loved. Last but not least on the pro side for me is the sheer versatility and replayability of this game. When you have so many unit cards available, so many different strategies, all this kind of stuff, not to mention the fact that when you're just tossing dice, maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't get lucky, you have a lot of different ways to play. And so each game does really feel different. You know, you might spend one game where you focus more on like getting the war machines out and just peppering guys from far away and just keeping everything else off the table from yourself so you don't get friendly fire. You know, that kind of stuff. You can also just focus on the melee charge right off the bat and just try to get everybody into at least no man's land as fast as possible. You know, just all of these kinds of different things are really, really cool. And it makes it a very unique and interesting experience, like I said. Onto the cons, I already mentioned what's really the biggest con for me, and that is just the skill factor related to throwing the dice. It's nice because it's pretty offset by the melee aspects, because those are for sure hits if you roll the right number. It doesn't matter where it actually lands. All you got to do is roll properly and you get a good enough number. Another minor con for me is the rules, because the rules themselves are actually kind of unclear on a few different things. So for example, the rules always refer to north, south, east, and west. The problem is that it can say, for example, if you have a unit that is south of a structure, then it's behind it and you're immune to attacks. You're immune to ranged attacks. The problem is that if my opponent's sitting over there and I'm sitting over here, then south is still the same direction for us. South is always going to be this way, for example. So that means that if their unit is like on this side of the structure, so if like the structure is here, then their unit is here behind it and like facing me, then that means they are behind the structure. Like, it doesn't make sense. So I always use the interpretation of, you know, logic, where like, here's my wall, so I'm going to put my unit behind my wall. But as it is facing the enemy, it will be behind it. You know, it just makes more sense. And so the rules have a couple of little quirky things like that where it could have been explained a little bit better, but thankfully the game is simple enough that you can pretty much gather what was intended, or at least what I believe was intended and what's sensible as a gamer. Those are really my only major cons for this game though, because again, I love the theme, I love the fact that you've got some good replayability, you've got a surprisingly deep strategy with only a handful of different types of cards, and in the end, it is just a really, really fun game. So with that, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Again, if you haven't done so already, please check out my Facebook and my Twitter pages. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave any and all thoughts and comments below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it. But with that, thank you very much again, and I will see you next time.